She had no one, until her friend's millionaire brother chose to stand with her. Hello everyone. Before we begin today's story, I have a small favor to ask. Please hit subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you never miss our channel's new videos. It is quick, free, and the best way to support us in bringing you more dramatic stories. Your support means the world to us. Where are you watching from? Drop your city or country in the comments below. Thank you very much. Now, let us return to the main character. When she opened her eyes, the first thing she noticed was the silence. No voices, no footsteps in the hallway, no familiar sound of someone waiting nearby. The hospital room was dim, lit only by a small lamp in the corner. The monitor beside her bed blinked steadily, its soft beeping the only proof that time was still moving. Her body felt heavy, like it did not fully belong to her yet. Every breath was slow, careful, measured. She turned her head slightly and looked toward the door. It was closed. No flowers sat on the side table. No get-well cards. No buzzing phone filled with missed calls. Her phone lay face down on the tray, dark and silent, just as it had been since she woke up. She swallowed hard. For the first time since the accident, the truth settled in her chest with full weight. She was alone. Not the kind of alone that lasts a few hours. Not the kind that comes from a busy day. This was the kind of alone that comes when everyone else has already moved on. A few days earlier, she had still believed someone would show up. Maybe a friend, maybe a coworker, maybe someone who felt obligated to check in. But hours passed, then days, and now the quiet had become undeniable. Her best friend was out of state, caught in a situation she could not leave. Her family had been distant long before the accident, scattered across different lives, different priorities. And now, injured and unable to even sit up without pain, she realized how thin her world had become. She tried to shift her arm and winced as a sharp ache shot through her side. Her breath caught. She closed her eyes, waiting for it to pass, pressing her lips together so she would not make a sound. She did not want the nurse to come because of pain. She wanted someone to come because they cared. Minutes later, the door opened quietly. She did not turn at first. She assumed it was another routine check. Another clipboard, another polite smile from someone doing their job. But then she heard a chair move, slowly, carefully. She opened her eyes again and turned her head. A man was sitting beside her bed, not a doctor, not a nurse. He sat in the simple plastic chair near the wall, his jacket folded neatly over the back. His posture was calm, steady, as if he had been there for a while. In his hands was a paper cup of water, still warm, untouched. She stared, confused. She recognized him, but it took her a moment. He was her friend's older brother, the one she had met only a handful of times, the one who was always polite, always reserved, never staying long at gatherings, the one who had no real reason to be there. He noticed her movement and looked up. Their eyes met. "You are awake," he said softly, careful not to raise his voice. Her throat tightened. "How long have you been here?" "Long enough," he answered. She searched his face, trying to understand. "You did not have to come." He nodded slightly, as if he had expected those words. "I know." A quiet pause filled the space between them. Then he added, "But I wanted to." And in that moment, as the steady beep of the monitor continued beside her, she realized something she was not prepared for. When she truly had no one, he had chosen to sit down and stay. She did not speak right away. The question lingered in her mind, heavy and uncomfortable. Why was he here? Of all people, why him? He was not family. He was not a close friend. He was someone who existed at the edge of her life, connected only by her best friend, someone she had never leaned on before. Yet there he was, sitting quietly, waiting. She looked at the paper cup in his hands. The faint steam rising told her it was still warm. That small detail unsettled her more than grand gestures ever could. Warm water meant he had thought about timing. It meant he had paid attention. "You should not stay too long," she said finally, her voice low and dry. "Visiting hours will end." He nodded again, calm, unbothered. "I know." That answer surprised her. If he knew, then he was choosing to be here anyway. The room fell quiet once more. The steady rhythm of the monitor filled the space between them. Outside, somewhere down the hall, a cart rolled past. A nurse laughed softly with a colleague. Life continued, distant and indifferent. She shifted slightly, then stopped when pain tugged sharply at her side. Her breath hitched before she could control it. He noticed immediately. Do not move, he said gently, leaning forward just enough to be closer without touching her. You should rest. I am fine, she replied, though the words felt thin even to her own ears. He did not argue. He simply reached over and placed the cup of water on the tray within her reach, careful not to disturb anything else. If you need anything, he said, you can tell me. She almost laughed. Tell him? Ask him for help? The idea felt foreign, almost inappropriate. She had spent years handling things on her own, telling herself she did not need to rely on anyone. Now, injured and unable to even sit up without assistance, that belief felt fragile. Why are you really here? She asked, unable to keep the edge out of her voice. He leaned back in his chair, exhaling slowly. For a moment, she thought he might leave the question unanswered. Then he said, Your friend called me. That made sense. At least part of it did. She could not get back in time, he continued. She was worried. She asked if I could check on you. And you said yes, she said quietly. Yes. Another pause. But you did not have to stay, she added. No, he agreed. I did not. She studied his face, looking for signs of obligation, discomfort, or impatience. She found none. He looked tired, if anything, like someone who had been sitting still for a long time. His jacket lay neatly folded, untouched. He had not even checked his phone. Everyone else had something more important, she said, the words slipping out before she could stop them. He did not correct her. He did not offer reassurance that sounded rehearsed. Instead, he said, Sometimes people do not know how to show up. That simple sentence landed harder than she expected. She turned her gaze toward the ceiling, blinking rapidly. The bright light above blurred for a moment. She told herself it was just the medication, just exhaustion. The truth was, she had expected disappointment. What she had not expected was quiet understanding. Minutes passed, then more. He remained where he was. Eventually, a nurse came in to check her vitals. The nurse greeted him with a brief nod, clearly assuming he belonged there. That assumption felt strange to her, as if the world had decided something before she had. When the nurse left, she glanced at him again. You can go, she said softly. Really? He met her eyes. His voice was steady. I will stay a little longer. Not forever, not promises, just a little longer. For the first time since she woke up, the silence in the room did not feel empty, and she wondered, quietly, how long he planned to keep that chair beside her bed. The next morning, she woke to the sound of soft footsteps. For a brief moment, she forgot where she was. Then the familiar beeping returned, steady and calm, pulling her back into the hospital room. Pale morning light filtered through the narrow window, casting long shadows across the floor. She turned her head slowly. The chair beside her bed was no longer empty. He was there again. This time, he was standing near the window, speaking quietly with a nurse. His voice was low, respectful, the kind that did not demand attention. When the nurse left, he noticed she was awake and turned toward her. Good morning, he said. Her throat felt dry. You came back. Yes. Not an explanation, just a fact. She glanced at the clock on the wall. It was early. Too early for someone who was supposed to have a full life somewhere else. You did not have to, she said, repeating the phrase she seemed unable to stop using. He pulled the chair closer and sat down. I wanted to check on you, that was all. On the tray beside her bed sat a small cup of water and a folded napkin. The water was fresh. She could tell by the condensation on the cup. Someone had replaced it recently. She reached for it, then hesitated when her arm trembled. Before she could pull it back, he leaned forward and gently steadied the cup, careful not to touch her hand. Slowly, he said. She hated how much she needed that help, hated how grateful she felt for it at the same time. Thank you, she whispered, after taking a small sip. He nodded, as if it was nothing. The morning passed quietly. A nurse came in, then a doctor. Questions were asked. Instructions were given. He remained silent during all of it, standing back, listening, absorbing every word. When the doctor left, she noticed something that made her pause. He had remembered everything. You are allowed to sit up a little later, he said. They said no more than 15 minutes. She looked at him. You remembered that? Yes. And the medication? Every 6 hours. The realization settled slowly. He was not just showing up. He was paying attention. That afternoon, he returned again. This time, he brought nothing with him. No flowers, no gifts, just himself and that same quiet presence. He pulled the chair into the exact same spot, as if it had always belonged there. It became a pattern. Each day, he came back. Sometimes he spoke, sometimes he did not. When she slept, he sat quietly, reading messages on his phone without leaving the room. When she was awake, he listened, not in a way that pushed her to talk, but in a way that made space if she wanted to. On the third day, she finally asked, "Do you ever get tired of sitting here?" He looked at the chair, then back at her. "It is just a chair." That answer made her smile despite herself. The routine continued. Warm water in the morning, quiet company in the afternoon. The chair pulled close before visiting hours ended. Each small act, repeated without comment, without expectation. And slowly, something inside her began to ease. The fear that she would open her eyes and find herself alone again started to loosen its grip. The silence no longer felt heavy. It felt shared. One evening, as the sun dipped low and painted the walls with soft orange light, she spoke without looking at him. "I am not very good at asking for help." He did not rush to respond. "I know," he said gently. She swallowed. "I usually wait until people leave." There was a pause. Then the sound of the chair shifting slightly as he leaned forward. "I am still here," he said. She closed her eyes, breathing in slowly, carefully. For the first time since the accident, she allowed herself to believe that this was not temporary kindness. It was a choice, and for now, that choice was enough. By the fourth day, the nurses began to recognize him. They greeted him with polite smiles, sometimes brief nods, as if his presence had become part of the room's rhythm. He did not correct them. He did not explain who he was or why he kept returning. He simply stayed. That morning, the physical therapist arrived earlier than expected. She introduced herself, then turned her attention to the bed. "We are going to try something small today," she said kindly. "Just a few minutes, nothing too much." The word "try" tightened something in her chest. She nodded anyway. When the therapist explained the movements, the ache in her side returned before she even shifted. Her fingers curled around the sheet as she braced herself. He stood up quietly. Not close enough to interfere, not far enough to disappear. "If you need to stop, say so," the therapist said. She tried. The pain came fast, sharp enough to steal her breath. She froze, eyes squeezing shut as she fought the instinct to apologize for failing. Before she could speak, she felt it. Not a hand on her body, not pressure, just his voice. "You are doing fine," he said, calm and steady. "You can pause." The therapist nodded in agreement. "That is enough for today." Relief washed over her, followed immediately by embarrassment. "I am sorry," she whispered, staring at the blanket. "For what?" he asked. "For not being stronger." He waited a moment before answering. "Healing is not about strength." She glanced up at him, unsure if she had heard correctly. "It is about patience," he continued, "and listening to your body." No one had spoken to her like that before, not with pity, not with pressure, just acceptance. Later that afternoon she grew restless. The walls felt closer than usual, the ceiling too low, the silence heavier. She shifted in bed, then sighed in frustration. He noticed. "What is wrong?" he asked. "I hate this," she admitted. "I hate needing help. I hate feeling like I cannot even stand on my own." He considered her words carefully. "You are allowed to need help," he said. "It does not make you less capable." She shook her head. "People always say that, but they leave." He did not respond right away. Instead, he reached for the chair and pulled it closer, sitting down with the same quiet intention he always had. "I am not leaving," he said. She looked at him sharply. "You do not know that." "I know what I choose," he replied. That night, after visiting hours ended, she expected him to stand up and say goodbye. He did not. He checked the time, adjusted the chair slightly, and stayed where he was. "You are going to get in trouble," she said softly. He smiled faintly. "I will be fine." The room dimmed as the lights lowered for the evening. The monitor continued its gentle rhythm. Outside the window, the city glowed faintly, distant and unconcerned. Her eyes grew heavy. Before sleep claimed her, she spoke again, barely above a whisper. "Why do you keep coming back?" He answered without hesitation. Because you should not have to do this alone." She did not respond. She did not need to. That night, she slept more deeply than she had since the accident, knowing that when she opened her eyes again, the chair beside her bed would not be empty. And somewhere in the quiet repetition of those days, something inside her began to shift. Not hope, not yet, but trust. By the end of the first week, the routine no longer felt new. It felt normal. She woke each morning expecting to see the chair beside her bed occupied, and every time, it was. Sometimes he was already there when she opened her eyes. Other times, he arrived quietly a few minutes later, as if careful not to disrupt her rest. The days blurred together in a gentle rhythm. Morning checkups, short walks with the therapist, afternoons filled with long stretches of quiet. He adapted to it all without complaint. When the therapist encouraged her to take a few steps, he walked beside her, matching her pace exactly. Not pushing, not hovering, just there. When her legs trembled, he did not rush to catch her. He simply waited, letting her regain balance on her own. "You are doing better today," he said once, not as praise, but as an observation. She nodded, breathing hard. "I still feel weak." "Weak is not the same as broken," he replied. She remembered that sentence long after he stopped speaking. In the afternoons, when the room grew warm and quiet, she found herself talking more, not because she felt obligated, but because the silence no longer made her uncomfortable. She told him small things at first, how she used to take long walks at night when she could not sleep, how she hated crowded places, how she had learned, over time, to rely only on herself because it was easier than being disappointed. He listened without interrupting. When she paused, expecting a response, he simply nodded, letting her continue if she wished. One evening, she surprised herself by saying, "I did not think anyone would stay." He did not ask who she meant. "I know," he said. The honesty in his voice made her chest tighten. That night, after he left, she lay awake longer than usual, not because of pain, but because her thoughts refused to settle. She replayed the day in her mind, the way he had remembered her limits, the way he never made her feel rushed, the way he treated her recovery as something that belonged to her, not something to conquer. The next day, her best friend finally called. The relief was immediate, followed quickly by guilt. "I am so sorry," her friend said, voice thick with emotion. "I should have been there." "You asked him to come," she replied softly. "Yes," her friend admitted. "I did not know if he would stay." She glanced toward the empty chair, knowing he would arrive soon. "He did," she said. That afternoon, when he returned, she watched him more closely than before. He moved with quiet intention, as always. Jacket folded, chair placed carefully, phone silenced. "Your friend called," she told him. He nodded. "She worries about you." "So do you," she said before she could stop herself. He did not deny it. "I do," he answered simply. The words settled between them, heavy but unspoken. As the days passed, the staff began to speak to him directly, including him in conversations about her progress. He never overstepped, never answered for her. When asked, he turned to her first, waiting for her response. That respect mattered more than she expected. One afternoon, as she practiced standing on her own, she wobbled and nearly lost balance. This time, she did not panic. She reached out, steadying herself against the bed rail. He did not move. "Good," the therapist said. "You are learning to trust yourself again." She smiled, breathless, and glanced at him. He smiled back, quiet and proud. That night, after the room grew still and the lights dimmed, she spoke into the darkness. "I am afraid," she admitted, "of getting better." He turned toward her. "Why?" "Because when I do, people usually leave." The chair creaked softly as he leaned forward. "I am not here because you are injured," he said. "I am here because you are you." Her eyes burned, but she did not look away. For the first time, she believed him. And somewhere between the steady rhythm of the monitor and the familiar presence of that chair, healing became more than recovery. It became connection. The reveal did not come with an announcement. There was no dramatic interruption, no raised voices, no sudden change in his behavior. It arrived quietly, the way most truths do. It happened on a late afternoon, when the hallway outside her room was unusually busy. She was sitting up in bed for the first time without support, her back aching but steady. He sat in the chair beside her, reviewing something on his phone, his attention split between the screen and her breathing. A nurse knocked softly before entering. She glanced at the chart, then at him, and smiled politely. "Mr. Carter, the doctor will be here in about 10 minutes. The name hung in the air. He looked up instantly. "You can call me Daniel," he said, his tone calm but firm. The nurse nodded, apologizing. "Of course, I am sorry." She did not notice it right away. Her mind was still processing the sound of that name. Carter. The nurse finished her checks and left the room. The door closed gently behind her. She turned her head slowly toward him. "Did she just call you Mr. Carter?" she asked. "Yes," he replied. There was no hesitation, no attempt to deflect. Her heart beat a little faster. "As in Carter Holdings?" He exhaled quietly, setting his phone down. "Yes." The room felt smaller, not because of him, but because of everything that name carried. She had heard it before. Everyone had. Carter Holdings was not just a company. It was an empire. Real estate, technology, healthcare investments. A name that appeared in headlines and business articles, attached to numbers too large to imagine. She looked at the chair, the folded jacket, the paper cups of warm water. None of it matched the image in her mind. "You are a millionaire," she said softly. "Yes." The word landed between them, heavy and undeniable. She laughed once, short and breathless. "Of course you are." He did not smile. "I did not think it mattered," he said. She turned away, staring at the window. Outside, cars moved along the street below, small and distant, life continuing at a pace she could not yet match. "You never said anything," she said. "You never asked," he replied gently. "That does not feel fair." "No," he agreed. "It does not." Silence stretched between them. She felt something unfamiliar rise in her chest. Not anger, not relief. Distance. Everything she had allowed herself to feel over the past week suddenly felt fragile, rewritten, questioned. "Were you here because you wanted to be?" she asked. "Or because you could afford to be?" He leaned forward, elbows resting on his knees. "I was here because your friend asked me to check on you," he said. "I stayed because I wanted to." "That is easy to say when you have options," she replied. He did not argue. "I know what it looks like," he said. "I know how it sounds. But nothing about this was strategy. I did not come here as a businessman." She turned back to face him. "Then why did you not tell me?" "Because I did not want it to change the way you looked at me." The honesty in his voice made her throat tighten. "It changes everything," she said. He nodded slowly. "I was afraid of that." The truth was, she did not know what to think. The chair that had brought her comfort now felt like a reminder of imbalance. The quiet presence that had made her feel safe now came with a shadow she could not ignore. "You should go," she said suddenly. He looked up, surprised. "Do you want me to leave?" "Yes," she answered, more firmly this time. "I need time." He hesitated, then stood. He unfolded his jacket, slipping it on with deliberate calm. "I will give you space," he said, "but I am still here if you need me." He did not promise to stay. He did not promise to return. He simply nodded once and walked to the door. As it closed behind him, the room returned to silence. But this time it felt different, not empty, uncertain. The days after he left felt longer than all the days before. The chair beside her bed stayed empty. At first, she told herself it was necessary. She needed distance. She needed clarity. Knowing who he was had shifted something inside her, turning comfort into confusion. Every kind gesture now carried a question she could not silence. Would he have stayed if he were not who he was? The nurses continued their routines. The therapist returned. Progress was still happening, measured in small victories and careful steps. On the surface, nothing had changed. Inside, everything had. She found herself listening for footsteps that never came, catching herself glancing toward the door at the usual hour, then turning away when it remained closed. On the second day, her best friend called again. "I heard what happened," she said gently. She did not ask how. She already knew. "I asked him not to come," she admitted. There was a pause on the other end of the line. "Why?" "Because I do not know how to trust it," she replied. "I do not know how to tell if it was real." "It was real," her friend said without hesitation. "You cannot know that." "I do," her friend insisted. "He does not sit in hospital rooms for anyone." That sentence stayed with her long after the call ended. Later that afternoon, she struggled through her therapy session. Her balance faltered more than before. Her movements were cautious, almost restrained. "What is wrong today?" the therapist asked. "I am distracted," she admitted. The therapist nodded, understanding more than she said aloud. "Healing is not only physical," she reminded her. "Sometimes your body hesitates when your heart is unsure." That night, sleep came in short, restless stretches. She dreamed of the chair, of the quiet weight of someone choosing to stay. Each time she reached out, the space beside her was empty. By the fourth day, she was discharged to a recovery wing. The room was different, smaller, quieter, less equipment, less noise, more space to think. She sat by the window, watching people come and go below, families, visitors, lives overlapping and separating in brief moments. She wondered how many of them would still be there when recovery ended. A nurse entered with paperwork. "Your friend's brother called earlier," the nurse said casually. "He asked if you were settling in." Her chest tightened. "What did you say?" "That you were doing fine," the nurse replied, "and that you did not have visitors today." The words stung more than she expected. That evening, she tried standing on her own without assistance. She made it 3 steps before her legs gave out. She caught herself against the bed, breath ragged, heart pounding. Frustration surged. Tears followed before she could stop them. "I do not need help," she whispered to the empty room. "I do not." The words sounded hollow. She sank back onto the bed, staring at the wall until the light faded. It was not his absence that hurt the most. It was the realization that she had felt safer with him there, and that frightened her, because safety implied dependence, and dependence meant risk. On the 6th day, her friend arrived in person. She looked tired, relieved, and slightly annoyed all at once. "You pushed him away," she said bluntly, sitting at the foot of the bed. "Yes," she replied, "I did." "Do you know what he said to me?" her friend continued. "He said he understood. He said he would wait." Her breath caught. Wait for what? For you to decide whether his presence felt like pressure or choice. The room fell silent. That night she lay awake, staring at the ceiling, replaying every quiet moment he had spent beside her bed. He had never asked for gratitude, never asked for trust, never asked for anything at all, and yet she had asked him to leave. The next morning, she did something she had not done since the accident. She picked up her phone and opened his contact. Her finger hovered over the screen for a long moment. Then she set it down again. Not yet. She needed to understand something first. Whether healing meant learning to stand alone again, or learning when it was safe to let someone stand with her. She asked for him the next morning. Not with urgency, not with panic, just a quiet request to the nurse, spoken as if it had taken every ounce of courage she had left. "Could you let him know I would like to see him?" she said. "If he is available." The nurse smiled gently. "I will pass along the message." Then she waited. Minutes felt longer than they should have. She told herself she would understand if he did not come right away, or at all. She had been the one to ask for space. She had been the one to draw the line. Still, when the door finally opened, her heart skipped. He stood in the doorway, not stepping in at first. His jacket was folded over his arm, just as it had been before. His expression was careful, unreadable, as if he did not want to assume anything. "You asked to see me," he said. "Yes," she replied. He walked in slowly, stopping a few feet away, giving her room even now. "I am sorry," she said before he could speak, "for asking you to leave without explaining, for making it feel like your presence was something I needed to protect myself from." He listened, his gaze steady. "I was afraid," she continued, "not of you, of how safe I felt with you there." He did not interrupt. "I thought that if I let myself need that, I would lose myself again." He took a breath. "I never wanted you to feel like you owed me anything." "I know," she said. "That is why this was so hard." She gestured toward the chair beside her bed. "You can sit," she added. He hesitated, then pulled the chair closer and sat down, exactly where he always had. For a moment, neither of them spoke. Then she said, "I am not asking you to stay because I am injured." He met her eyes. "I know. I am asking because I want you here," she said, "and because I need to learn that letting someone stay does not mean I am weak." Something shifted in his expression. Not relief, not triumph. Choice. "I am here," he said, "not because I can afford the time, Not because I feel responsible. I am here because I choose to be. Tears filled her eyes, but she did not look away. Then stay, she whispered. He nodded once. I will. The days that followed felt different, not because her recovery suddenly became easier, but because it became shared again. He did not return to the old routine exactly as before. He adjusted, letting her take the lead. When she asked for space, he respected it. When she reached out, he was there. One afternoon, she stood on her own for the longest stretch yet. Her legs shook, but she did not fall. You did that, he said quietly. So did you, she replied. He shook his head. I stayed. You healed. The distinction mattered. By the end of the week, she was cleared to leave the recovery wing. As she packed her few belongings, she noticed the chair one last time. You never took that with you, she said softly. He smiled faintly. It felt wrong to move it. Outside, the sun was warm against her skin as she stepped carefully onto the sidewalk. He walked beside her, not holding her arm unless she asked. When they reached her ride, she paused. This does not end here, she said. No, he agreed. It does not. As the car pulled away, she looked back at him standing there, watching, steady and present. For the first time, healing did not feel like something she had survived alone. It felt like something she had chosen to share. The weeks that followed unfolded quietly. No announcements, no sudden transformations, just steady progress. She continued physical therapy 3 times a week. At first, every step demanded focus. Then, slowly, her body remembered how to move without fear. The pain faded into something manageable. The weakness softened into strength. He was there for much of it, not always beside her, not always visible, but present in the ways that mattered. Sometimes he drove her to appointments and waited outside, never intruding. Sometimes he sat nearby, reading while she worked through difficult exercises, offering nothing but patience. When she asked to walk alone, he let her. When she reached for support, he stepped in without hesitation. One afternoon, after a particularly long session, she sat on a bench outside the clinic, catching her breath. The sun was warm. The air felt lighter than it had in months. I did it today, she said, smiling softly. He looked at her. You did. She stretched her legs carefully. I walked the full hallway without stopping. That is not small, he said. She believed him. Later that evening, they shared dinner at her apartment. Nothing fancy. Simple food. Comfortable silence. She moved more easily now, no longer guarded by constant pain. At one point, she caught him watching her. What? She asked. You look like yourself again, he replied. She considered that. I feel like someone new, she said. Someone who knows she does not have to disappear to survive. That night, as he stood by the door preparing to leave, she spoke before he could. Stay, she said. Not because I need help, because I want company. He smiled. All right. Months passed. Life resumed its ordinary pace, but something fundamental had changed. She returned to work part-time, then full-time. He returned to his responsibilities as well, though she noticed he guarded his time differently now. They did not rush anything. They learned each other slowly, deliberately. Mornings spent walking together. Evenings spent talking about everything and nothing. Some days were easy, others were not, but neither of them walked away. One evening, they revisited the hospital together. Not the room, just the hallway. She stood near the spot where the chair had once been placed. This is where everything shifted, she said. He nodded. This is where you let someone stay. She turned to him. This is where you chose to. They stood there for a moment, then left hand in hand. Later, standing outside beneath a quiet sky, she said, I used to believe healing meant becoming untouchable. He listened. Now I think it means knowing who is safe enough to stand beside you, she continued. He squeezed her hand gently. And choosing each other. She smiled. Not because everything was perfect, but because it was honest. She had once believed she had no one. The truth was, she had found something better. Someone who did not save her. Someone who did not rescue her. Someone who simply refused to leave. And in that choice, she healed. Sometimes, love does not arrive loudly. Sometimes, it sits quietly in a chair beside your bed and waits. And sometimes, that is everything.